Thanks for tuning in for the 4 o'clock news and politics show. Ava Gaudet was up at 3 with a great entertainment lineup. Be sure to check that show out if you didn't get to already. 4 o'clock on Tuesdays, we get the Inside the Beltway take from Jennifer Lawless down at American University. Jennifer, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, how are you?
We're good, but you are where the action is happening all weekend long, was all shut down all the time, and then we saw the temporary resolution of it yesterday, and there's been some fallout. So walk us through, was this what was expected, or did this just, did this surprise folks?
Well, I think a week ago at this time it was pretty unexpected because it looked like the Democrats and Republicans in Congress actually had a bipartisan deal, at least to keep the government open for a few more weeks, and it seemed early on that Donald Trump was going to sign on to that deal. He reneged, and then even as late as Friday, when Chuck Schumer went back to the White House to try a last-ditch negotiation, once again, Trump seemed to be on board until a few hours later, his staff called the senator and reneged again. So I don't think anybody expected this, because we've had dozens of continuing resolutions to fund the government. But February 8th is now the new deadline, and it seems like really all they've done is kick the can, because now the negotiations are even going to be tougher. Chuck Schumer made it clear this morning that he's not going to pay for anything close to what he had offered for the border wall last week. So it's unclear whether the government will be open on February 9th.
So let's talk about those Schumer negotiations that took place on Friday. Was that the first time he coined the phrase, was it negotiating with Jell-O?
It was the first time I heard it. He has previously said that Donald Trump is a man who doesn't know how to take yes for an answer. And so, I think they both tap into the same thing, which is that Donald Trump sitting at the table seems to think it's a pretty good deal, and then rumor has it that he goes back and either John Kelly or Stephen Miller basically tell him that the base won't like this. And that is something that's actually quite different from what we've seen in Washington, because especially when we're on the precipice of a shutdown, the base usually becomes a little bit less important than the American people more broadly.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. When the president sits down with Chuck Schumer, is that a one-on-one? Why don't we have his folks in the room to prevent that sort of game of telephone happening and being back at square one?
So apparently they each had one person in the room. And my understanding is that with Donald Trump, he is most influenced by the person he speaks to last. And so when a couple more staffers spoke to him afterward, and the deal had not been publicly announced yet, they felt that there was still plenty of time for him to pull the plug. Of course, Chuck Schumer making that announcement is quite damning, because it suggests that this is not a president who's able to negotiate in good faith, even if perhaps he intends to initially.
And let's talk a little bit about that. You're a political scientist, you've studied history, you know other administrations. Have we seen anything quite like this, that members of Congress going to the White House, sort of having that maybe handshake or say we've come to an agreement on something, come back repeatedly and say
no?
Flat out no.
No. And I think part of it is because in the past, when there was really not room for a deal, the meeting wouldn't take place in the first place. And so this is a White House that seems to want to broker a deal. Donald Trump ran for president as the best negotiator that there was out there. And so, I do think that he initially believes that it's something that he'll be able to do, and then he feels hamstrung by the base that elected him in the first place. And especially on an issue like immigration, even if he's not that certain about what his position on DACA is. Like he announced this morning, the White House said, and Mitch McConnell reported as well, that the president's position on DACA is contingent on what he can get for that position. And so that makes it very, very difficult for any kind of agreement to be struck.
And let's talk about what we saw amongst the Democratic Party and folks within the party who were upset with those members who voted for this, saying, you're allowing them to promise you a vote on DACA in good faith when they've seen the other party not operate in good faith. Anything like that we've seen before. Was it not a good deal, or was it just the only deal they could get?
Well, I think time will tell. If it turns out that there is actually a vote on DACA, then maybe it was a good deal. At this point, there's no reason to expect that it was a good deal, because the tax bill, you might remember, one of the agreements to get people like Jeff Flake to vote for that bill was the promise of a vote on DACA within the coming weeks, and that did not happen. So the White House has reneged before. Mitch McConnell has promised things and not delivered. We'll see. The one thing that's a little bit different here is that you had 25 senators from both parties come together and say, look, we've got to end this government. It's not just the Democrats that were living in purple states or the Republicans that thought they might be vulnerable. So if there's that kind of push on McConnell, maybe there actually will be a vote. Of course, that doesn't mean that even if there is a vote and even if the Senate does pass something, that Paul Ryan will get his membership to agree to it. Remember that the House is far more conservative on issues like this than the Senate.
And so, as you mentioned, we could be in the very same position here come the February 8th, next target date come February 9th. What do we expect to see between here and there?
I mean, I'm not that hopeful. I'm not sure. I mean, part of the problem is that there's not a specific blueprint for what an immigration bill would look like. And we're already seeing discussions about how comprehensive that immigration bill needs to be. It was DACA and border security that were initially linked to the government shutdown bill. But the Republicans are now saying, and Donald Trump is saying, that family migration, which they call chain migration, or the visa lottery system need to go as well. And the Democrats are saying, no, that's not part of the deal right now. So it's hard to know. I think a lot will depend on how comprehensive an immigration bill the Senate decides to pull together. The more comprehensive it is, the lower the chances that it will pass the House.
And let's talk a little bit, obviously all eyes on the shutdown, but a lot of talk right now as to where Mueller's at in his investigation. And the topic that Jeff Sessions spent hours with Mueller. Again, was that a one-on-one?
I don't think it was one-on-one. He was accompanied by his lawyer, and I don't know who from Mueller's investigation participated. We do know that it was hours. He was not under oath. That could potentially be a next step, but this is consistent with the White House claiming that they're being fully cooperative. Now, we don't know how cooperative Jeff Sessions was. We know that in the past, when other White House officials have been cooperative, they've then invoked executive privilege that does not actually apply, and you wind up even, with Republicans saying things like, I don't know what to do, we have to subpoena this person. Maybe they were more cooperative with Mueller. But this is significant for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's a very high-ranking cabinet official who was close to Donald Trump, not only during the campaign, but also during the transition, who had not yet been questioned. And it also demonstrates that Mueller is getting increasingly close to Trump himself. And just today, reports came out that Mueller wants to ask Donald Trump specifically about the firings not only of Jim Comey, but also of Michael Flynn, which suggests that Mueller is really zeroing in on what look to be obstruction charges.
And so it's interesting, you mentioned you don't know how much, obviously, Jeff Sessions said to Mueller, but reports that there were hours. It's kind of hard to imagine that he didn't, that he must have said something in the course of hours.
So one would hope. I mean, I read something that it was even 7 hours, but keep in mind that, when Hillary Clinton testified before the Congressional Committee about Benghazi, she was there for 11 hours and provided no new information, even though she readily answered every single question, because a lot is contingent on what questions are being asked. And so, a lot of this has to do not only with whether Jeff Sessions is willing to answer them, but how much detail is Mueller offering. And, so these are the kinds of things that we don't know. I would hope that after that amount of time, it allowed Mueller to move a little bit further in his investigation.
So let's go over to the FBI side of things with Christopher Wray. Did he threaten to resign or not?
It depends who you ask. Like, everything in this administration is contingent on who happens to be in front of the microphone. So apparently, Christopher Wray threatened to resign when Jeff Sessions, through Donald Trump, put pressure on him to fire Andrew McCabe, whose wife had been, involved in Democratic Party politics, but who himself had not done anything that seemed at all nefarious regarding Trump or Clinton. When McCabe said that he would not resign, when McCabe said that he would not resign, and when Wray said that he would not fire him, the questions became whether Wray could sort of, continue to exist in this administration. The White House, though, and the Justice Department, I guess, are quite cognizant of the fact that yet one more firing would look very, very bad, and it would look like there was another piece of evidence for obstruction. So, according to Christopher Wray, it was a threat. According to Donald Trump, it never even happened. But it's hard to imagine that it never happened when so many people on that side are telling the same story.
Okay, it's almost like the reports from the remarks regarding Trump and immigration. Depends on who you're talking with.
Right.
And speaking of who you're talking with, I did want to raise up this one if folks are talking about it inside the Beltway. The feud between Megyn Kelly and Jane Fonda. Of course, I said not quite politics, but every time you bring Jane Fonda into something, politics are inherently involved. So getting a lot of play, she'd had Jane Fonda on. There was the plastic surgery flap, and then I guess Jane Fonda had some things to say last week about Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly turned around and said additional things about Jane Fonda and her role specifically in Vietnam. And then today, Megyn Kelly, not on the show.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of different dynamics here. The first is that I think Megyn Kelly is learning that she's actually not at Fox News anymore. And if you're hosting an hour of the Today Show in the morning, you can't take as explicitly a partisan view or as negative a view about something for which Jane Fonda has apologized a million times and was not at all relevant to what she was being questioned about. I think Megyn Kelly is also probably learning that at the end of the day, Jane Fonda has more star power than Megyn Kelly has. So, I just think that this highlights this strange line that we're beginning to cross when a lot of these TV personalities from explicitly partisan cable networks wind up coming on to the mainstream news. And, it's a different audience, first of all. And there are also different norms that apply. So I wasn't that surprised that she's now on this mini hiatus. I will say that, the other thing to keep in mind here is that the fact that her criticism of Fonda was this immediate knee-jerk Vietnam moment suggests that she was probably feeling quite defensive, because with a little bit of thought, I'm not sure that that's where she would have.
And it's interesting because you mentioned being on the network shows. The way it was, from what I'd seen with Megyn Kelly talking, it's kind of hard to be extemporaneous. You know what I'm trying to say? Extemporaneous. Thank you. With something like that, there has to be camera shots. It has to be part of the show. So you have to wonder, did her producers know that this was going to be part of the segment? Did her producers sign off on it? Is other heads going to roll? I can't imagine Megyn Kelly did it off the cuff unless you have a different reaction.
No, I don't think it was necessarily off the cuff. I'm not sure that the top executives at NBC were well aware of what was going to happen. And so, I think we'll see what happens as that continues. But it certainly puts the Today Show in a little bit of a precarious position, because they want politicians from both sides of the aisle. They want pundits. They want everybody that they can to get on not only that show, but also on Meet the Press and all of the other NBC affiliates. And if there seems to be this sense that, well, some of these people are going to try and engage in gotcha moments with non-politicians, that doesn't make it a particularly hospitable place for them to be able to break news.
I think it's pretty safe to say that Jane Fonda might not be coming back on Megyn Kelly anytime soon.
I think that is probably the right conclusion to draw.
Well, as we stand here looking again at what happened to avert the shutdown for now, appreciate being able to pick your brain as to what you think could transpire moving forward and the political implications. Jennifer Lawless, as always, appreciate your taking the time to Skype in.
Have a good week.
Thanks, you too. Okay, Jennifer Lawless down at American University Skypes in most every Tuesday to give us the temperature gauge of what's happening inside